I recently wrote a blog post on justice, and I referenced two of King's quotes, which is what you just saw on the previous two screenshots. I am a firm believer in both the principle and the virtue of justice, that justice is a virtue. If you are going to have an orderly, prosperous, sustainable society, justice must be found in it. And it must be a justice that is common to all. Unfortunately, we live in a multi-tiered judicial system. And I'm not just talking about here in America, I'm talking about globally. The corruptness in our judicial system is a major contributing factor to the national debt that we have. It has been my observation that the number one way to oppress a people is to deny them equal protection under the law. If you can't go to the courts and get redress and relief, what other alternative do you have? But moreover, directly to your question, to your comment, is that we see the inequities in how justice is meted out as it pertains to celebrities, the wealthy, and our politicians. It is undeniable that we live in a tiered judicial system. I recall having a conversation regarding the administration twice removed. I'm talking about the one that was helmed by the Muslim. For the record, I'm not bashing Muslims. I'm just identifying the administration that I'm referring to. And I was made aware of illegalities that took place in that administration, both abroad and here. And those acts are well known in certain communities and circles, and yet no one went to jail, despite the fact that numerous people should have went to jail. Now let me say this. I'm not implying that I have contacts or I'm connected or I have sources. It just so happens I happen to have a conversation with a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who lived next door to a guy who knew a guy. Be that as it may. In order for certain politicians and corporate assets, when I say corporate assets, think of industry plants. People call them industry plants. I call them corporate assets. In order for them to face justice, there would have to be a whistleblower, and the story would have to get out in such a way that it cannot be contained by conventional methods. Or the asset would have to be deemed of no further value to its overlords. And in those instances, they would simply throw that individual on the altar of sacrifice, or as I like to call it, tying up loose ends. For instance, Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was the very embodiment, the essence, and the epitome of a patsy. When you look up the word patsy, all they're going to have is a picture of Lee Harvey. No caption, no words needed. The Warren Commission gave us the lone gunman theory. So we were told that Lee Harvey conceived of it himself. When I say conceived, in other words, he said, I'm going to whack the president. So he conceived of it alone. He planned it alone. He financed it alone. He carried it out alone. Lone gunman. They then made sure that we saw Lee Harvey get bumped off on national TV. We saw him get killed right there on national TV. You talk about tying up loose ends. Lone gunman, no further investigation needed. He did it all by himself. End of the investigation. Now, watch this. You talk about a sense of irony or a sense of poetic justice. We saw Lee Harvey shoot the president on national TV, lone gunman. Turn around, Lee Harvey gets shot on national TV by another lone gunman. Talk about tying up loose ends. Now, here's what I find interesting about Lee Harvey being an asset. You got to think about how the decade of the 60s started and how it ended. They had, you started with Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, The Donna Reed Show. You end with Woodstock, Castro Street, the hippie movement, and recreational drugs, and open debauchery. Now, in order to get such a parabolic shift, there need to be a trigger event. And that was the assassination of the president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. His death on national TV shocked America out of its innocence, and it traumatized the nation. Remember, traumatized people are more susceptible to predictive programming and operant conditioning. Again, going back to how the decade started, I was talking with a friend about music and how music, on one hand, is a reflection of the culture, but on the other hand, how music is used to drive and shape the culture. Okay, you look at the Beatles, how they started, mop top, wearing the suits, and then look what they transformed into, all within the same decade. But then I pointed out a group called the Temptations from Motown. I said, you got to notice how they started and how they ended. It wasn't as dramatic a shift in appearance, but it was in their music. Listen, this is what I mean. You had a man named David Ruffin, tall, romantic lead, and they were crafted in his image. So now you can't have the most dominant male singing group in the nation, black group, singing music that is inconsistent with where the culture is going. So the Temptations had to be transformed to sing music that reflects and drives the culture as well, the psychedelic music. Okay, well, David Ruffin is too dominant a personality for them to make that shift believable. So they kick him out and they install Dennis Edwards. And when you look at the Classic Five lineup and the post-Classic Five lineup, it's like it ain't even the same group. It's only been one major change, though, but it's like it's two different groups. And I'm not just talking about the music, I'm just talking about in terms of the presentation of it all. You now have remade the image of the number one R&B black male group, and they now are a reflection of the music of the culture and times. Most people miss that. Him getting kicked out was not an accident, especially at the time that it happened. You gotta watch how the game is being played.